Beyond the Free Elemental Worlds, the Etheric World by Thoresen. Forward. This book may be considered as the third volume in a trilogy, which may become a septomology. I start to understand that now, but not in 3 to 4 lives. It will, contrary to the first 2 books, be a relatively short book, as the world beyond the elemental world, the etheric world, is quite unknown to me, but some quotes and passages will be brought from Steiner, Durnov, and other spiritual leaders of humanity. Some descriptions may be found in Vedic literature, in Buddhist literature, and in anthroposophy. I will try to describe this in the best way I can. At this point I recall my amazement when, at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, the struggle between the demigods and the human families ends totally unforeseen for me, that the heroes in the Tao, the family of the Pandavas, are still stuck in the elemental world, while the losing parties, the Kauravas, go to the next plane, either the etheric, the astral, or the spiritual world. I then understood that most of my life I had been under the illusion that the elemental worlds were the spiritual or the etheric world, and not only more or less the illusory worlds created by the adversarial forces. These elemental worlds are, of course, interwoven in the life-giving streams and forces of the etheric, and further higher worlds, but they are still part of the great Maya, the great illusion. The first volume was The Northern Way of Initiation. This book was about how one can pass the threshold of the spiritual world. There are, of course, many thresholds, but this was the first threshold to the third realm of the elemental world, and what one can see and experience on the other side of this threshold. In the third as a beginning, but during the writing also the second and the first realm of the elemental world. During the work with this book I happened to get the COVID-19 disease, receiving the great benefits of being half dead for 4 months. My experience with this disease started actually a half year before it emerged in China, in the summer of 2019, when I was lecturing in Napoli, Italy. At the same time that I was lecturing, there happened to be a great demonstration of young people, led by the famous Greta Thunberg from Sweden. I stood at the pavement watching the demonstration pass by, and then I observed a high spirit, probably belonging to the rank of archetypes, hovering over the whole demonstration. I understood that this spiritual being was the inspiration of Greta Thunberg, just as the French national archangel was the inspirator of Joan d'Arc back in the 14th century. And even if Joan of Arc was used and misused by the leading men or authorities at that time, she was still led by the French national spirit. The same concerning Greta Thunberg. Many claim that she is used and misused by a number of economic interests. Still, she is led by this archetype that I observed. This archetype was to imprint an impulse in the world, not to misuse and rape nature, and Greta had founded a youth movement in an attempt to galvanize world leaders to act over the destruction of the world. However, world leaders, or most other people regretfully, didn't seem to pay enough attention to this movement and its leading archetype, so that by the end of 2019 or the early months of 2020, the fallen counterforce of this mighty being descended and turned into its material counter-image in the form of a coronavirus. When a spiritual impulse is not accepted, it turns to its opposite or pathological counter-image, experienced as a fallen spiritual being, inhabiting a viral expression of the excreted toxins of animal cells, calling forth the now known COVID-19, causing disease or death. Think about what happened to the impulse after Rudolf Steiner's Christmas conference of 1923-24. But as we shall see, the disease this counter-image calls forth, when it is survived or worked through, will open new possibilities and spiritual abilities. The fight that human beings had to wage against this darker force opened partly their spiritual sight into the second realm of the elemental world, and, possibly, later to the first realm of the elemental world, where the deeper foundation of all the physical world resides. In time, hopefully, this may also open their understanding and respect for nature and its elemental foundations. It is quite interesting to observe that the original beneficial spiritual entity wanted us to restrict air travel through Greta, and as we did not do that, the adversarial spirit descended, and our resistance to this, the disease itself, forced us to restrict air travel. This opening of the deeper realms of the spiritual or elemental worlds happened also to me. For many years, very many years, I have read about, talked about, and even been able, to a certain extent, to see clairvoyantly into the spiritual world, or etheric world as I believed it to be, but now understand to be the so-called elemental world with its multitude of entities. I am now aware that this elemental world constitutes a certain materialized part of the etheric world, the part that expressed itself as the foundation of the material existence. Now I understand that the difference between the material, the elemental and the etheric worlds are greater and more profound than I had thought, and probably the differences between these and the pure spiritual world is even greater. The elemental world needs forces from the etheric world, but they are fundamentally different. Why can I say this with such authority? Because, as described through this trilogy, I've been able to observe both the material world as well as the elemental worlds, and now the etheric world. The possibility to compare all three worlds has been available to me only for a relatively short time. The material world and the third realm of the elemental world have been accessible to me for many years, but the rest only recently. So to continue with my story towards the thresholds of the deeper realms of the elemental world. This path started when I was lecturing at Emerson College in Forest Row, England, on the 7th of March 2020. There I was infected with the coronavirus called COVID-19. On coming home to Norway on the 9th of March, I did not feel that anything was wrong. I felt completely fine. On the 12th of March, Norway decided to quarantine all those that had been abroad, and my clinic was also closed by governmental decree. On the 14th of March, I got a fever, alternating with heart pain, headache, stomachache, and bleeding from the nose, as well as visual changes for about 8 days. Then it was all over, I thought. On the 22nd of March, I tried to saw a plank, but could not because I immediately got completely exhausted. After that, I could not do any physical work for 65 days. Then I slowly managed to do something physical, each day a little more, and on the 13th of June, I felt that I was 60% back to my old strength. On the 1st of July, about 70%. During this period of utmost weakness, deep exhaustion, and feeling half dead, I did not even consider taking any medication, calling the hospital, or contacting any doctor. I usually accept and embrace my diseases, considering why this particular disease has come to me, how it works with my karma, and how I can grow in accepting and embracing it. On the morning of the 30th of March at 8 o'clock, during our regular morning meditation in front of our fireplace, suddenly my spiritual view changed, or deepened. Most of my life I've been able to see at a certain level deeper than the material world, into what I've described in several of my books as the etheric world or level. It was actually only the third realm of the elemental world, but now another, deeper level suddenly appeared. I was amazed. I had never thought about this, but from the theory I knew that several esoteric writers had described, or at least mentioned, I had never read any detailed descriptions, that there were multiple and deeper layers in both the elemental, etheric, astral and spiritual worlds. It was in the stones of the fireplace that I saw one of these deeper layers the first time. The fireplace is made out of Norwegian soapstone. Suddenly I saw the elemental beings and forces that made up the stone itself at a molecular level. Later I understood that at this level I saw the atomic forces or elemental beings and not the molecular forces or beings. After this further opening of my spiritual eyes, many things changed. A few days later, an even deeper layer appeared, deeper than the atomic forces. It was as a void of elemental forces existing in vacuum. I understood quite soon that these two new levels had to be the second and the first elemental realms. This opening of the spiritual eye was due to a total embracing and accepting of my half-dead period of 4 months following the COVID-19 infection. As usual, when I embark on a new path, I try to write down and describe my experiences, and also try to find what others have described from or about the situation that I'm in, and that resulted in volume 2 of this trilogy. This volume I called The Three Realms of the Elemental World. At that time I had no idea of a third book, or a further book for that matter. So after the COVID-19 disease I slowly recovered, and during the summer of 2020 I regained 80% of my former strength. Then on the 3rd of August 2020 I had a relapse of the disease, and I was put back into the former half-dead state I'd experienced since March. Again I sat in front of my fireplace in the morning, meditating, gazing into the soapstone, and observed the 3 realms of the elemental world. This time I was able to go further in. I went into the furthest border of the first realm, and suddenly, after pushing on the border, I traversed it, finding myself beyond the border. There I found a completely alien world. It was like a parallel world with a certain mirror-like expression. All was opposite of the 3 elemental worlds. Then I immediately understood that I had to write a third book called Beyond the 3 Realms of the Elemental World. This book contains the preliminary results and observations of the travel into this world beyond the elemental world. In this book there are a few references to what other seers have reported. I have found one important reference in understanding the pure etheric world in one of the main books written by Rudolf Steiner in his book Occult Science, published in 1909. More on this in part 1. Apart from Steiner and Dunoff, possibly also Daskalos, it seems to me, when going through much of the published material on the etheric body or the etheric world, that much is confused with the elemental world. Alice Bailey writes, for example, and this is from a treatise on cosmic fire, quote, "The etheric body is a web or network of fine interlacing channels, formed of matter of the 4 ethers and built into a specific form. It forms a focal point for certain radiatory emanations which vivify, stimulate, and produce the rotary action of matter." End quote. This description seems to me to be of the elemental world and not the etheric, but I might be wrong. The advancement from the elemental world to the pure etheric world seems to me as a development from existence to being. In the elemental world we find more or less an existence with a beginning and an end, as in creation. This is always related to an interference by the adversarial forces or beings. The adversarial forces are those necessary to bring forth existence. In the etheric world all things are in being, there is no time there. This distinction between existence and being, between the elemental world and the etheric world, is very important, yes, of essential importance when looking for or finding the Christ, who will appear in the etheric world after 1914, after Dunoff, or 1933, after Steiner. We will see later in this book that the etheric world is, at least in one aspect, 12-fold, like 12 layers of an onion, and in the 3 to 4 inner layers I can find the Christ. In the 3 to 4 inner layers of the earth, which is the reflection of the 12 parts or layer of both the etheric world and the cosmos, that is, the 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th layer of the earth, the bride of Christ is to be found, the Sophia Maria, the female parts of God's creation. As I see this distinction between existence and being, many modern seers, theosophists and anthroposophists mistake the elemental world for the etheric world, even the spiritual worlds like lower and higher Devachan, and thus will not find the Christ in the elemental world. They will only find a luciferic resemblance of the Christ in the 3rd realm of the elemental world, an Aramanic resemblance in the 2nd realm, and in the most dangerous azuric resemblance of the Christ in the 1st realm. We will discuss this further in part 2 of this book. I will here end with a quote from Rudolf Steiner from his lectures Secrets of the Threshold. This is from Lecture 3, GA 147. Quote, Here I shall give the name elemental world to the first world that the soul of a human being enters on becoming clairvoyant and crossing the threshold. Only a person who wants to carry the habits of the sense world into the higher supersensible worlds can demand a uniform choice of names for all the points of view the higher worlds can offer. At the close of this course of lectures, and also in my small book coming out in a day or two, The Threshold of the Spiritual World, I shall point out the connection between the terms chosen here, for example, elemental world, and those in my books Theosophy and Occult Science, soul world, spirit world, and so on, in order that people do not look for contradictions in a superficial way where they do not exist." End quote. In this I agree so much, as I find numerous quotes and books by spiritualists or even anthroposophists that mix together the elemental worlds with the etheric world. Not so much the astral world and the spiritual world, but especially the free realms of the elemental world and the higher levels of the noetic world. Often the third elemental world is described as the elemental world, the second realm as the etheric world, and the first realm as the spiritual world or lower devachan. Then the astral world may be mistaken for the higher devachanic world. A man takes with him into the devachan his causal body and the purified, ennobled parts of his astral and etheric bodies. These belong to him permanently and he never loses them. At a particular moment, just after he has laid aside his astral corpse, he stands face to face with himself as if he were looking at himself from the outside. That is the moment when he enters devachan. Devachan has 4 divisions: the continents, the rivers and oceans, the airy region, etheric space, the region of spiritual archetypes. The first division, everything is seen as though in a photographic negative, everything physical that has ever existed on this earth, whether as mineral, plant or animal, and everything physical that still exists appears as a negative. And if you see yourself in this negative form as one among all the others, you will be in devachan. What is the point of seeing yourself in this way? Quote, "Fully new demands meet the life of soul when it steps over the threshold into the elemental world. If the human soul insisted on entering this world with the habits of the sense world, 2 things might happen. Cloudiness or complete darkness will spread over the horizon of the consciousness, over the field of vision, or else, if the soul wanted to enter the elemental world without preparing itself for the peculiarities and requirements there, it would be thrown back again into the sense world. The elemental world is absolutely different from the sense world. We have to have, then, one peculiarity of soul for the elemental world, the capacity for transforming our own being into other beings outside ourselves. We must have the faculty of metamorphosis." End quote. This capacity of metamorphosis is very important in my work as a doctor, both for animals and for humans. If the disease which is anchored in the third realm of the elemental world is not transformed or metamorphosed, it will translocate to another being. Quote, "We must be able to immerse ourselves in and become the other being. We must be able to lose the consciousness which always, in order to remain emotionally healthy, we have to have in the sense world the consciousness of 'I am myself.' In the elemental world we get to know another being only when in a way we inwardly have become the other. When we have crossed the threshold, we have to move through the elemental world in such a way that with every step we transform ourselves into every single happening, creep into every single being. You will easily understand that in order to exercise the faculty of transformation, the soul needs something more than it already possesses here in our world. The human soul is too weak to be able to change itself continuously and adapt itself to every sort of being if it enters the elemental world in its ordinary state. Therefore, the forces of the human soul must be strengthened and heightened through the preparations described in my books, Occult Science and Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. Let us suppose that a person's clairvoyant consciousness, when returning over the threshold, were to take back into the sense world the faculty of transformation it has to have in order to be at all aware of the spiritual world. The faculty of transformation I've been speaking about is a peculiarity of the human etheric body, which lives by preference in the elemental world. Now suppose that a person was to go back into the physical world, keeping his etheric body as capable of transformation as it has to be in the elemental world, what would happen? Each of the worlds has its own special laws. This is so true, and may often be forgotten when passing this first threshold to the elemental world." End quote. This venturing from the more or less known experience of the third realm of the elemental world, which I thought was more or less the real spiritual world, into the second and the first realm, and from there to the etheric world, happened so fast, only during some months. Already I can sense that there are further worlds, which I guessed is the astral world and then the spiritual world. Maybe I will write more books in the coming years, I do not know. Updates of the trilogy, the Northern Way of Initiation, 3 realms, and beyond the 3 realms of the elemental world, the etheric world, will surely come. A personal story of a developing clairvoyant sight from seeing the 3rd elemental realm, then to see the 2nd and the 1st elemental realms, and then to see beyond the elemental world itself into the etheric world. I will now describe some personal experiences and insights relating to the opening of my sight into these realms and worlds, both the 3rd, the 2nd and the 1st elemental realm, which are all intermingled and interpenetrated, and also the world beyond. The actual threshold passing is described in the Northern Way of Initiation and in 3 realms. The following is described how I experienced the entering of the different levels or realms. Seeing into the 3rd realm of the elemental world. To see into and or experience the 3rd realm of the elemental world is described by my seers, including myself. This is thoroughly described in my book, Experiences on the Threshold and Beyond. In this book I will refer to especially interesting observations, as they throw some light on the relations between the elements of the physical world and the elemental beings of the elementary world. One observation when studying a Norwegian Stave church, one in listening to a music festival, and the last observation regarding the production of biodynamic preparations. The creation story of the elves. Before I refer the mentioned observations, I will briefly recount a long conversation I had with one of the leaders of an Elvish colony I came to while visiting Iceland. This story was told to me by both the elves and the hidden people, and these correspond in the main essentials. We must first of all remember that the material existence of the human being depends upon the sacrifice of both the Ahrimanic and the Luciferic beings of all 3 elemental realms. Without them coming into human development, the incarnation of man in the material realm would have been impossible. All the inhabitants of the subhuman elemental realms are thus of an adversarial nature. The gnomes, elves, salamanders, sylphides and undines are Ahrimanic beings, including all the benefits and dangers this today will and must imply. Then to the creational story of the elemental inhabitants themselves, as given to me by the elder of 1 elf colony and 2 colonies of the hidden people. These words are not from me or from Rudolf Steiner, they are direct from the elves and hidden peoples. Quote, "In the first beginning, the human beings, together with the whole world, existed only in the spiritual realm, in the etheric. Nothing was material, and only a warm etheric fluid existed. The cosmic plan, however, was that the known world should materialize in the material realm. To be able to enter or penetrate into the material realm, it was necessary to make a division in the etheric, just as God made a split in the waters on the 2nd day of creation. One part was kept in the etheric, and one part was expelled into the material realm. The material part was then, as a consequence of this split mirror vice, created upside down. That is why humans always see the etheric phenomena as in a mirror. It is really the material world that is upside down. This split is today seen in the turning of the fetus in the 3rd week of embryology. The cosmic etheric forces are both 3-fold, 4-fold and 12-fold. The threefoldness, constituted of thinking, feeling, and willing, reflects especially the division of the elves, as they likewise are split in 3 groups, although they cooperate perfectly. This shows that in the elemental realm, the entanglement of the 3 cosmic forces are not as in the mineral realm, where they are intertwined. The blue elves are masters of spiritual thinking, the yellow ones of cosmic thinking, and the red ones of cosmic willing." End quote. In the 3rd realm of the elemental world, there are very many kinds of elemental beings, but 4 main groups stand out. They are the beings of fire, called the salamanders, air, called the sylphides, water, called the undines, earth, called the gnomes. Fire, air, earth, and water are the 4 basic elements of nature. Within each of the 4 elements there are 3 realms or levels of elemental beings. The 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd realm are kingdoms of elemental beings. The beings of the 3rd realm are often called nature spirits. All the elemental beings together of all 3 realms are the spiritual essence of that element. The elementals are made up of etheric substance that is unique and specific to their particular element. But as this etheric substance is imprisoned with the adversarial beings, this etheric substance looks very different from pure or genuine etheric substance. This can be seen or heard especially in the quality of their colours and in the quality of their sounds. The colours are much brighter and shiny, and the sounds are sharper and louder than the colours and sounds of the pure etheric world, which we will describe later. The entities of the 3rd realm often resemble the human shape. These elemental beings work primarily on the mental plane and are known as builders of form. Their speciality is to translate thought forms into physical forms by transforming spiritual patterns into first astral patterns, then pseudo-etheric patterns, and then finally physical patterns. Each of them is a specialist in creating some specific form, whether it is an electron out of the beings of the 2nd elementary realm or interstellar space out of the beings of the 1st elementary realm. Elementals range in size from smaller than an electron to vaster than galactic space. They do not remain individualized as humans are. They may be etheric thought forms, yet they have etheric flesh, blood, and bones. They live, eat, talk, act, and sleep. They cannot be destroyed by material elements such as fire, air, earth, and water, because they are etheric in nature. They are not immortal. When their work is finished, they are absorbed back into the ocean of spirit. They live a very long time, 300 to 1,000 years, and have the power to change their size and appearance at will. They cannot, however, change elements. Earth, gnomes. The nature spirits of the earth are called gnomes. There are many subgroups: brownies, dryads, Daedalus, earth spirits, elves, hamadryads, pans, pygmies, silverests, satyrs, nissa, dirges, holder, and many more. Billions of elemental beings from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd realm tend the earth through the cycles of the 4 seasons and see to it that all living things are supplied with their daily needs. They also process the waste and byproducts that are an inevitable part of our everyday existence and purge the earth of poisons and pollutants that are dangerous to the physical bodies of man, animal, and plant life, including toxic waste, industrial efflua, pesticides, acid rain, nuclear radiation, and every abuse of the earth. On a spiritual level, the gnomes have an even heavier duty. They must clean up the imprints of man's discord and negativity that remains at energetic levels in the earth. War, murder, rape, child abuse, the senseless killing and torture of animals, profit-seeking at the expense of the environment, as well as hatred, anger, discord, gossip, all these create an accumulation of negatively charged energy that creates demonic elementals and becomes a heavy weight on the earth body and on the beneficial nature spirits, as well as causing disease in humans and animals. Fire, salamanders. The salamanders are the spirits of fire. Without these beings, fire cannot exist. You cannot light a match without a salamander being present. There are many families of salamanders, differing in size, appearance, and dignity. Some people have seen them as small balls of light, but most commonly they are perceived as being lizard-like in shape and about a foot or more in length. The salamanders are considered the strongest and most powerful of all the elementals. Salamanders have the ability to extend their size or diminish it as needed. If you ever need to light a campfire in the wilderness, call to the salamanders and they will help you. It is said that salamanders and the other elemental beings can be mischievous, even malicious at times. For example, a fiery temper and inharmonious conditions in a person's home can cause these beings to make trouble. They are like children in that they don't fully understand the results of their actions. They are greatly affected, as are all nature spirits, by human thinking. Air, Sylphides. Sylphides are air elementals. Their element is said to be the highest vibratory rate of the four, air, earth, fire and water. They are said to live to be hundreds of years old, often reaching 1,000 without appearing to get old. They are said to live on the tops of mountains. Sylphides often assume human form, but only for short periods of time. They vary in size from being as large as a human to something much smaller. They are volatile and changeable. The winds are their particular vehicle. They work with the gases and ethers of the earth and are kind towards humans. They are usually seen with wings, looking like cherubs or fairies. Because of their connection to air, which is associated with the spiritual aspect, one of their functions is to help humans receive inspiration. The Sylphides are drawn to those who use their minds, particularly those involved with creative arts. Water, Undines. Undines are the elemental beings that compose water. They are able to control, to a great degree, the course and function of the water element. Etheric in nature, they exist within the water itself, and this is why they can't be seen with the normal physical vision. These beings are beautiful to look at and are very graceful. They are often seen riding the waves of the ocean. They can also be found in rocky pools and in marshlands. They are clothed in shimmering substances resembling water, but shining with all the colours of the sea, predominantly green. The concept of the mermaid is connected with these elemental beings. The Undines also work with the plants that grow under the water and with the motion of water. Some Undines inhabit waterfalls, others live in rivers and lakes. Every ocean has its oceanide. The Undines closely resemble humans in appearance and size, except for those inhabiting smaller streams and ponds. The Undines often live in coral caves under the ocean or on the shores of lakes or banks of rivers. Smaller Undines live under lily pads. The Undines work with the vital essences and liquids of plants, animals and human beings. They are present in everything containing water. There are many families of Undines. They are emotional beings, very friendly and open to being of service to humans. The smaller Undines are often seen as winged beings that people have mistakenly called fairies. Those winged beings are seen near flowers that grow in watery areas. We are thus trapped in each of our worlds, the human beings and the elementals. The elemental beings in the elemental realms as Aramanic, Luciferic and Azuric entities, and the humans in the material realm balancing between the Aramanic and the Luciferic. The only way to a redemption and liberation of both sides is for the material human to spiritualize so that both sides may reunite with the help of Christ's force. Elemental beings in relation to the old Norwegian stave churches, in this example the one standing in Oslo, Biodynamic. The first thing I observed when I went towards the stave church, after having activated my clairvoyance, was that the church was made up of 4 layers, similar to a cream cake. Each layer was inhabited by elemental beings, each layer containing elemental beings of its own kind. The first layer contained the gnomes, the second the Undines, the third the Sylphides, and the last and top layer contained the salamanders. The gnome elemental beings in first and bottom layer, expressing the life ether of the etheric world, move slowly in a circle with the sun. The undying elemental beings in second layer, expressing the chemical ether of the etheric world, move slowly in a circle against the sun. The sylphide elemental beings in third layer, expressing the light ether of the etheric world, move slowly in a circle again with the sun. The salamander elemental beings in fourth and upper layer, expressing the warmth ether of the etheric world, move slowly in a circle against the sun. As we now understand, these elemental beings are related to a fourfold division of the etheric forces. We will later see that the etheric world is also 12-fold in its structure, just as the human body, the earth, the planetary system, and cosmos. When we entered the church, we could, to my great astonishment, see the physical signs of the 4 kinds of the elemental beings painted on the walls of the Stave church, exactly at the same levels as the elemental beings were operating. Quadrats, 4 sides, are expressions of the gnomes, or the life element of the etheric world. Half-moons are expressions of the undines, or the chemical, also called tone element of the etheric world. Triangles are expressions of the sylphides, or the light element of the etheric world. Circles or spheres are examples of the salamanders, or the warmth element of the etheric world. Observations listening to a music festival. I will now give you a short spiritual description of Sandefjord Fjord Classic Festival. 23 top musicians played music from Joe Katsovitsky, Part, Tur, who was the festival composer and present himself, Beethoven, Sartre, Prokofiev, Debussy, Stravinsky, Anfield, Schubert, Mozart, Brahms, and Dukas. What I now observed clearly was that several of the music pieces were made up of 3 or 4 parts, and that each part often represented or created one of the ethers, either the water, light, earth, or life ether. I started to observe that each piece of music created or built an elemental structure of the 3rd realm of the elemental world in the room where the musicians were playing. This creation resembled the structure of the Stave church in many ways, as it mostly contained all the 4 elements in a certain harmonious inner structure and relationship. I also observed that the music from the great composers created an harmonious building constructed from all the 4 elements mirroring the etheric ethers, while the music from the lesser composers was lacking bits or parts of the harmonious elemental structure. In the beginning of the music, in the 1st part, a sort of structure was created, as when building a house that the framing is the first to be made. In the 2nd and 3rd part, this structure started to be filled with flowing forms, often with a certain colour, chemical or light ether, water element or air element. In the 4th part of the music, if it was constructed with 4 parts, the music was crowned with the warmth ether, the fire element, the salamanders. For some of the composers, one of the elements, ethers, was totally missed, so that the building or construction stood unfinished or unfulfilled. I will not criticize any of the composers, but must comment that the buildings of Beethoven, Mozart, Tur, and Stravinsky were the best to look at. Beethoven's music built up temples with Tibetan dragon forms, Himalayan mountains, and Tibetan culture. Could Beethoven have had a Tibetan incarnation? Mozart built Gothic cathedrals with angel forms. Stravinsky built low buildings that in the end was crushed and destroyed. Could this relate to the time he lived with the destructions of Stalin? Tur built quite small cabin-like constructions without any communication with each other. And then at the end, the unavoidable and undesirable clapping, the applause that destroyed and took down all the beautiful constructions. I hate clapping. Observations about the production of biodynamic preparations. Rudolf Steiner gave his agricultural course in Korbowitz, now Korbowcice, Poland, on the 7th till 16th of June in 1924, GA 327, where he described how one can and ought to help the earth and the world and the compost used in agriculture to be aware of the cosmic influences. One of the important tools in this work are the biodynamic preparations. We have 7 preparations. 1. Oak bark inside the cranium of a cow. 2. Nettles buried in the earth. 3. Yarrow inside the bladder of a deer. 4. Manure in the horn of a cow. 5. Plant juice of Valerian officinalis. 6. Dandelion in the cross, mesenterium of a cow. 7. Chamomile inside a cow's intestines. All preparations made, remodelled or strengthened certain parts, organs or abilities of the gnome elementals in such a way that they could be more beneficial to the agriculture. The nettle preparation had produced elemental beings with especially big eyes. The yarrow inside the bladder of a deer had enlarged the kidneys of the elementals so that they were sensitive to the astral forces. The chamomile inside the cow intestines gave a body-tasting ability. The oak bark inside the cranium of a cow activated the Vermerian organ, an organ that science doesn't know the effect of. Manure in the horn of a cow activated the whole digestive apparatus. Dandelion in the cross, mesenterium of a cow activated the observation of the cosmic forces, especially the stars. The plant juice of Valerian officinalis elevated the sensibility of the skin. In this way, the heap of compost could be transformed into a sensing organism, serving the dying earth. But, as we later will see, the presence of Christ is necessary, and to this the biodynamic agriculture has not yet come. Seeing into the second realm of the elemental world. This is described in my book The Three Realms, and in summary is as follows. My dream life got enormously active. It was as if I dreamt consciously the whole night through. In my awake state, beings or forces from the second realm appeared more and more often, and this felt as if reality came closer and closer. To be more precise, I felt closer to the deeper elemental forces behind the material world, still understanding that there was a pure spiritual world behind the elemental world, and this pure world was experienced later. My nature experience started to resemble somewhat like being painted by Vincent van Gogh, streaming and alive. Many art pictures felt as if I had experienced the same, pictures from Hilma af Klint, Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch and others. I thus started to feel a great love for the whole cosmos, probably an effect of feeling closer to the creation, although I also felt more distance because of the deep experience that the real spiritual world was still behind both the etheric and the elemental worlds. I suddenly understood that the material world is Maya. The following weeks and months were like going around in a new world, so much felt changed. One of the greatest changes was to be observed in the water, the rain and the sea. I was out on a beach to swim in the salty water, a beach I had visited many times during my whole life, but now it was changed. The way I saw the sea was not as before, and I felt a sting of sadness for losing my old view and impression of the sea. Before it was beautiful, aesthetic and soothing. Now it was personal, individual, and full of life and movement, apart from the normal movement that the sea always has. The movement and life were connected to another realm, to another sphere, to another life form from the one that I had loved for years. It was, in a way, as if something was gone, and that gave me a sting of sorrow. Also, the fact that I felt some kind of responsibility for this new realm made me feel as if I had to work, as if I had a job to do, and could not just relax in the beauty of the rolling waves. It felt like there was so much more now, so much more to get acquainted with and work with and have responsibility for. Then clouds also changed dramatically. Suddenly they contained patterns, forms and colours that I had never seen before. The colours changed between purple-green, purple-red and purple-orange, and they continuously make this described change. In watching the clouds during the spring and summer of 2020, I came to a deeper understanding of something the Master Peter Dunov once said about seeing the future or present tendencies in the clouds, that in doing this one has to look deeper into the phenomena of nature. When I thus have been looking at the clouds and the cloud formations, I then go deeper into the cloud formations where I first experience or see the elementals of form, of structure, in the second realm, the forces of nature. So in describing the forces of the first realm, I might also use the word meaning as a description, cosmic forces, and God's meaning, intention. seeing into the first realm of the elemental world. In the first realm, we leave the structure of things, even the molecular or atomic structure, and are left with the streaming forces of vacuum, of cosmos. To explain this, I will describe the different levels of looking at birds. When I look at a crow flying in the air, I first see 1. The material crow, then, going deeper, the energetic streams in the body, etheric energy streams, then going deeper, the elemental being of the third realm connected to and sustaining the crow, looking like a moving and ever-changing head of a wolf, then going deeper, the elemental beings of the second realm, which looks like the structure, atomic structure of iron, the metallicity of iron. Then going deeper, the huge planet of Mars appears, pointing to the second hierarchy of the spiritual world, Dynamas. Then, going deeper, the elemental beings of the first realm appear, which as a structured entity cannot be observed, but the enormous power and movements of the cosmos reveal themselves as powerful underwater streams. Looking at a seagull, the head of a horse appears in the third realm, the metal of silver as well as the planet of the moon in the second realm, and the vast forces of the cosmos in the first realm. Looking at a hawk, the head of an otter appears in the third realm, the metal of copper as well as the planet of Venus in the second realm, and again the vast forces of the cosmos in the first realm. It seems that every single bird species has a resemblance to an existing animal head in this third realm of the elemental world, to a metal and planetary movement in the second realm, and to a cosmic force which I cannot specify in the first realm of the elemental world. Some of the same can be described concerning the flowers and the insects. Another interesting observation I've had is relating to the rain. Before, when I could observe the elemental beings of the third realm, I could observe the rain beings, the entities that could be summoned by the aboriginal rain dances. Now, when I enter the second realm, each raindrop appears as an individual entity with its own elemental being and signature. In the first realm, the enormous cosmic force creating the rain reveals itself, a force which to me at the present time is not individualized. This individual existence of the raindrops shows itself physically in sensitive crystallization, as when the snowflakes are formed in the air, they are all different. When I thus have been looking at the clouds and the cloud formations, I then go deeper into the cloud formations where I first experience or see the elementals of form, of structure. Then, in the second realm, the forces of nature, and in the first realm, meaning pours forth, meaning like the destiny of our lives or of world happenings. Another very strange and interesting change happened in relation to thinking, feeling and willing, especially in relation to willing. For a long time I've been able to observe clairvoyantly the etheric streams in the body related to thinking and feeling. I've thought about willing, but as Steiner had said that willing is a very hidden and not understood force, I've never actually looked for this force. Then, on the morning of the 8th of July, at 7 o'clock, I suddenly could see the will forces streaming in my arms and legs. It was not a slight and diffuse vision. No, it was very clearly, strong, and possible to repeat. If I concentrate my sight on an artificial phenomenon like electric light, some very different areas of the hidden worlds appear. When I thus look at an electric bulb shining in my living room, I first see the material and light-giving bulb, then, going deeper, the elemental being of the third realm, connected to the Ahrimanic and Luciferic forces being the light, looking like the moving and ever-changing heads of demonic entities. Then, going deeper, the adversarial elemental beings of the second realm, which looks like black, thin lines zigzagging the whole room. Then, going deeper, a dark area of the solar system appears, as if I see behind the sun's domain, to an anti-sun. Then going deeper, the same dark force appears, but now related to the whole cosmos. Also, when I am in a room lit with many fluorescent tubes, and then go to the second realm of the elemental world, the whole room appears as a picture of modern art, with a lot of black lines traversing the canvas or room in all directions. Going to the first realm, the whole space is filled up with a darkness that is overwhelming and frightening. In this darkness many spider-like beings are living, and I have the clear impression that this is the building up of the ape sphere in the earth. Holding this ape sphere in my consciousness and directing the gaze also to the other planets of the solar system, it has become clear to me that all the planets also have their aromatic constructions resembling the Earth's ape sphere. Illustrated by the white figures inside the planets should be dark figures in the next figure. It might be that some understanding of quantum physics may surface and suffice in the understanding of these phenomena. The laws of quantum physics are, in my opinion, related to the interface between the first and the second realm of the elemental world, and as we know from quantum physics, the human consciousness is of crucial importance. The first realm of the elemental world relates to the vast cosmic space, and thus exists only as possibilities as long as our consciousness does not penetrate this first elemental realm. The universe is full of dark matter, which might be its elemental ethereal possibilities not yet grasped by the conscious mind or the understanding of scientists. Then, after a while, living in this new reality, I started to develop a sort of analytic view on this, and realized that the form of everything was given by the third realm, the last realm to enter the Earth evolution. In the second realm, the atomic structure was revealed, and in the first realm, the foundational and creative force of all materiality was inherent, the vacuum of all materiality. It started to dawn on my consciousness that, to understand numbers, to understand separation, I had to understand the third realm. To understand weight, to understand gravity, I had to understand the second realm. And to understand measure, the distance between everything, I had to understand the first realm, the nothingness separating all things, the most difficult and mysterious to comprehend. The colours in the second realm are sharper and brighter than in what we later will describe concerning the etheric world, where they are more like diffuse pastel colours. The colours in the second realm are like Newton described them, and in the etheric world like Goethe described them. This small fact seems to me to be very important, the intensity of the colours, the shapes and the environment itself. The adversarial aspect makes it sharp with clear borders, strong light and colours, clear and defined tones. The Christ or spiritual aspect makes it all go soft, undefined, somewhat blurry, with no defined borders and more like cosmic music and tones. Rudolf Steiner started his teaching on the 19 lessons given in 1924 by describing the human condition in the physical world in the first lecture, February the 15th, 1924. And this is GA 241. Quote, where on Earth's foundation, colour upon colour, life creative manifests itself, where from earthly substance, form on form, the lifeless world takes on its finished shape, where sentient beings, strong in will, delight in the warming glow of their existence, where you, O man, derive your body from earth and air and light. End quote. This mantra has always caught my attention and also kindled a deep feeling of importance. Why does the material body originate from earth, air and light? Not until the morning of March the 30th, 2020 at 8 o'clock did I understand this. Then I saw with my own eyes that the third realm of the elemental world was characterized by forms as if existing in the realm of the earth. Second realm of the elemental world was characterized by lofty beings hurrying in horizontal movement, just like the birds flying in the air. First realm of the elemental world was characterized by shining light, so bright and colourful that it was impossible to actually see the beings living or existing there. We can find in Steiner's earlier descriptions that he characterizes the third realm of the elemental world as world of coloured forms. Second realm of the elemental world as a world of free-sounding tones. First realm of the elemental world as a world of shining colours. Seeing into the world beyond the elemental world. On the 3rd of August, something new and exciting happened. The day before, I had a relapse of the COVID-19 exhaustion and was sitting exhausted in front of my fireplace, just as I had done when the deeper realms of the elemental world had revealed themselves. Sitting there in the sofa, almost half dead, I thought that I should go again to the first realm to make some further investigations. In my weakness, I had not the power to stop in the first realm, and suddenly came to the farthest away border of the first realm. This border showed a very strange appearance, as it was moving and changing in a manner that I had never seen before. I crossed the border and entered a whole new world, a world that on the first glance appeared as a mirror-like reflection of the totality of the material world and the three realms of the elemental world. However, the colours and movements in this new world was very little like the colours in either the material world or the elemental worlds. The movements and the colour in this new world were like a pastel-coloured water or jelly. This makes me think about something Judith van Holler said about the experiences after death. She said that on many levels one gets the choice between two options, between two different roads. One road is characterized by strong light and strong colours. One road is characterized by soft light and pastel soft colours. The road with the strong light, colours and sounds lead to the adversarial forces of the elemental realm, especially to Lucifer. The road with the soft light, colours and sounds leads to the Christ forces of the Etheric realm, to Christ. Part 1. Description of the evolution of cosmos, and then what was before the beginning, discussion of time. As part 2 of this book will conclude and show, this world beyond the elemental world is the pure etheric world as it was before the elemental world was created by the cooperation of the angelic hierarchies and the adversarial forces of Lucifer, Ahriman and Asuras. The etheric world thus expresses a timeless and spaceless existence like it was before time and space existed. To understand this world beyond, it is therefore necessary to get a certain understanding of how our cosmos was before the material creation, and also to a certain extent how the material and elemental world has developed after the moment of creation. When I enter through the threshold into the third elemental realm, then further to the second and the first realm, I had the definite impression that I, in addition to going deeper into the spiritual, also go higher into the spiritual world, and also back in time as well as forward in time. In his book Occult Science and Outline, originally published by Rudolf Steiner in 1909, he has a chapter or section where he describes man and the evolution of the world. In this part, Rudolf Steiner describes the evolution of the world and of man from the state of Saturn to the state of Vulcan. To understand what I try to explain and describe here in this book, it is necessary to get a certain insight in and of the evolution of the Earth, and then we can start to understand what was before that, what still is beyond the first elementary realm. The 7 planetary phases. In anthroposophy, the concept of astronomy reaches far beyond the material concept of the universe as we have been taught. The planets Steiner refers to represent much more than the rock and gaseous formations we observe in our telescopes. By now the reader should have surmised that the spiritual world and all that it encompasses is much more complex. In Steiner's view, the planets represent the stages of the evolution of mankind. According to anthroposophy, there are 2 oppositional yet complementary concepts regarding these spheres. The actual material planets and the planets as representative of the phasology of the evolution of both Earth and its inhabitants. Steiner explained that mankind as well as Earth have, so far, passed through 3 major stages which he called Old Saturn, Old Sun and Old Moon. We are currently now in the phase of the Earth that we now inhabit, present Earth. He also claimed that the present planets of the solar system are evolutionary descendants of their namesakes. For example, the planet Saturn as we see it now is a remnant of the planetary condition called Old Saturn. In a way, The planets of Anthroposophy actually represent a timeline of our evolution towards our highest I. The time where we join together as a single entity of selfless love and pure singular consciousness in the spiritual dome over the temple of humanity. Therefore, today's planets are manifestations of evolutionary states that have happened or will happen and evolve in a way that is similar to humans. To take this further, we can say that the entire solar system has been incarnated in a series of progressively more advanced forms. Old Saturn, Old Sun, and Old Moon were stages of this evolution. During Old Saturn, the solar system assumed its first incarnated state, which varied significantly from its present form. The purpose for the evolution of the solar system was to enable humanity to evolve. In this sense, we in the Earth are the centre of the solar system, in all of its progressive forms. The evolution of the Earth, therefore, is essentially the same as the evolution of the entire cosmos. Therefore, according to Anthroposophy, at the beginning of time, Earth was in a planetary phase called Old Saturn. So far, there have been 4 incarnations of the Earth: Old Saturn, Old Sun, Old Moon, and present Earth. Our current planet is a culmination of the previous stages of cosmic evolution as part of the continued evolution of the entire solar system. Between each phase of evolution there is a death or a pause, followed by a reincarnation into a new form. For example, all of the parts of Old Saturn died before the reincarnation of the entire solar system into a second form called the Old Sun. Then all of Old Sun disappeared. Following another rest period, the entire solar system then reincarnated in a third form called Old Moon. As stated, the solar system reincarnates in different forms for the benefit of mankind, so that we can evolve to higher spiritual levels. The cosmos at the present Earth stage of evolution, after dissolving, will rest, and everything in the solar system will reincarnate in a new condition called future Jupiter. That condition will later be followed by a rest phase, and then an evolutionary stage called future Venus, which in turn will be followed by a rest phase, and then an evolutionary stage called future Vulcan. Humans who reincarnate into the future Vulcan stage of existence will be at an extremely high spiritual level. Depicted below are the 7 stages of the evolution of the solar system. Along the way, we live on the successive focal point of the solar system as it existed then. Our evolution is, in essence, a descent, in that we become more densely physical at each stage, but thereafter we reascend towards the highest spiritual consciousness of future Vulcan. The planetary phases. During the first incarnation of the cosmos as Old Saturn, we were just emerging into existence. There was no material substance nor sense of consciousness. We were somewhat awake during Old Sun and during the Old Moon. We developed the ability to dream. Presently we experience ordinary waking consciousness, but our consciousness will be greatly expanded in future stages of evolution with the development of clairvoyant awareness. Keep in mind that these planets that we are referring to represent different phases or reincarnations of the planet Earth. Although Earth is the home of man, Steiner has explained that there were times in his evolution that spirits of some of the constituents departed this planet. For example, at one time, during the present Earth stage of evolution, humans fled to other planets in the solar system. According to Steiner, humans once lived on the lost continent of Lemuria, which they destroyed. These souls then moved from the Earth to other planets. During the later Atlantean epoch, during early present Earth, these souls gradually came back in order to incarnate under the changed earthly conditions to appear in new incarnations. Therefore, the humans who went to Saturn came back having been changed by the spiritual forces of Saturn, as did the souls who went to Mars or those that lived on Jupiter. In other words, they returned, changed by their experiences. After these epochs, humanity consisted of Earth humans, Saturn humans, Mars humans, and so on. This explains the emergence of different races within human evolution. However, Steiner also believed that these divisions are also the work of Lucifer and Ahriman. Humanity was intended to evolve together, but these forces during Atlantis preserved earlier human types while other humans evolved onwards. The planetary seals. The 7 planetary seals are images that were created and drawn by Rudolf Steiner. They were carved into the columns of the first Goetheanum 90 years ago and artistically represent the metamorphosis of cosmic and human development from one planetary phase to the next. These symbolic figures are a means by which we project thought forms in our etheric sheath to instigate a stream of development into the outer etheric world. This sequence of forms perfects our etheric body through the creation of appropriate thought forms. The correct display of these 7 seals opens a way for us to work with them consciously, to understand the 7 stages of one developing living organism. Old Saturn. This is the beginning of man at a time when the only sensation that existed was that of warmth. From this warmth, the seed of man was formed as a being infused with a simple mineral consciousness. This is a primal state that preceded the development of the etheric body. With time, these human phantoms, so to speak, assumed a form through the activity of higher beings called spirits of will, wisdom, motion, and form. After this phase, a still point arose as the planet decayed, and a reincarnation to the next phase began. Old Sun. At this stage, the cosmos became infused with air, which allowed for the creation of our etheric body. Our consciousness was comparable to a dull, dreamless state, similar to that of the world of plants. During this time of our evolution, the sun was a planetary condition representing the entire cosmos. The process of higher spirits continued to work on us, but at a more advanced level. The spirits of personality, as well as the archai and archangels, also participated in our development, especially in furthering the germination of our unique human I consciousness. It is at this point that we separated our essence from the primordial substances that would become present-day minerals. Then we waited during the rest period, Pralaya, for stage 3. Old Moon. At this 3rd stage of our development, we developed a primordial version of our astral sheath through the work of fire spirits. Dreams became incorporated into our sleep in a consciousness that resembled that of animals. Our development was also under the guidance of the angels and the spirits of twilight. The astral body, the seedbed for our emotions, laid the groundwork for our individual spiritual identities. At this point, the physical body started to emerge along with a passionate and emotional astral sheath and a sensory etheric sheath. This half-animal, half-man creature was still soft and underdeveloped, and toward the end of this phase, 2 separate sets of sexual characteristics were beginning to emerge. Also during this phase, the sun split off and took with it higher beings. Left on the moon were lower entities, including mankind as it existed before there was an I consciousness. At this point, the moon and its inhabitants further condensed to receive the sun's influence as a separate external globe. Luciferic spirits also remained with the moon and actively participated in the development of our free will by tempting us towards evil in order to give us the freedom of choice. Present Earth. The phase of the Earth is actually divided into 2 parts, divided by the incarnation of Christ into the body of Jesus. The first part is called Mars. It is during this time that mankind started to become physical. After the birth of Christ, we entered the second aspect of present Earth called Mercury. This is the time we begin our ascent back towards the spiritual world. This is the current stage we are in. In addition, the present Earth stage consists of 7 sub-stages referred to as the 7 conditions of life. 7 conditions of life. First, elementary kingdom. Second, elementary kingdom. Third, elementary kingdom. 4, mineral kingdom. 5, plant kingdom. 6, animal kingdom. 7, human kingdom. We are now in the mineral kingdom condition of life, living in the physical stage of form. Within this stage there are 7 great epochs. We are currently in the 5th, which is entitled the Post-Atlantean. When we began life on Earth, the Polarian epoch, it was still united with the sun and moon, and our earthly form was mostly etheric. This is where the I, or ego body, began to evolve. It represented the spark of divinity that spawned our own identity. We now, in this current post-Atlantean epoch, have an I, but it is important to note that we are still not yet fully human. This is why we are considered to be in the mineral kingdom. We must evolve further to attain human kingdom status. Even then, we will not be fully evolved until the Vulcan phase. 2 important epochs that have preceded the current one were the Lemurian and the Atlantean epochs. In these periods, we became distinctly physical and divided into different races and sexes. Lemuria was destroyed and replaced with Atlantis. During these epochs, woman and man separated into 2 separate sexes. Women went inward and were responsible for the development of imagination and the soul faculty of feeling. Men were more involved in the development of the outward soul faculty of will. When Lemuria was destroyed by volcanic eruptions, the evolution of man continued on Atlantis. It was originally a highly spiritual society, including evolved occult initiates. However, Ahriman, by tempting these powerful rulers with materialism, corrupted them, causing Atlantis to be destroyed in a great flood. Future Jupiter. After the dissolution of Earth, the entire universe will reincarnate as the Jupiter phase, a mirror image of the old moon. The concept of imagination will at this time be perfected, and its inhabitants will be formed out of human will through the pineal gland. Future Venus. Venus represents the 6th planetary phase as a mirror image of the old sun. When mankind ascends to this level of evolution, he will perfect the stage of inspiration. In addition, our etheric sheath will develop complete consciousness. We will have conscious sleep and see the spirit world. In fact, those who have become initiated can exist in this future now. Future Vulcan. This planetary phase represents the final planetary condition as the mirror image of old Saturn. Only the most highly evolved humans will progress to this phase, while others end up on the old moon. It is at this time that we perfect the stage of intuition. In reaching Vulcan, we will recapitulate all the stages of our evolution. At this point, mankind will be completely spiritualized. Everyone who survives to the final stages of evolution will have reached the highest stages of consciousness that comes with intuition. Man will essentially become the 10th hierarchy, and with the power of Christ, create a new solar system. Let us then advance to an understanding of how the world was before the Saturn stage, before the creation, before the Big Bang, as materialistic science would express it. We will then go to the already mentioned excerpt from the book Occult Science and Outline by Rudolf Steiner, the chapter Man and the Evolution of the World. One might ask what the manifestations of the Saturn evolution prior to this state of heat are. What existed before cannot in any way be compared with anything that is accessible to an outer sense impression. Prior to the state of heat, a state existed that the human being can experience at the present time only in his inner nature. This is also the world beyond the first realm of the elemental world. Quote, if he gives himself up to ideas that he himself forms in his soul without the impelling impulse of an external impression, he has something within himself that physical senses cannot perceive. On the contrary, it is only accessible to higher perception. The manifestations that preceded the state of heat of Saturn can be present only for him who possesses supersensible perception. 3 such states may be mentioned. Pure soul heat, which is outwardly imperceptible. Pure spiritual light, which is external darkness. Finally, a spiritual state of being that is complete within itself and needs no external being in order to become conscious of itself. Pure inner heat accompanies the appearance of the spirits of motion. Pure spiritual light, that of the spirits of wisdom. Pure inner being is bound up with the first emanation of the spirits of will. With the appearance of the Saturn heat, our evolution for the first time passes over from a purely spiritual inner existence into one manifesting externally. It will be especially difficult for the present-day consciousness to accept the statement that with the Saturn state of heat, what is called time first makes its appearance, for the preceding states are not at all temporal. They belong to the region that in spiritual science may be called duration." End quote. So here we have also described the threshold between the etheric world beyond the elemental worlds and the elemental worlds themselves. Quote, "For this reason it must be understood that in all that is said in this work about such states in the region of duration, expressions referring to temporal relationships are only used by way of comparison and explanation. What precedes time, as it were, can only be characterized in human language by expressions containing the idea of time, for we must also be conscious of the fact that although the first, second and third states of Saturn did not take place one after the other in the present sense of the word, we cannot do otherwise than describe them one after the other. Indeed, in spite of their duration or simultaneity, they are so interdependent that this dependence may be compared with a sequence in time. By thus pointing to this earlier evolutionary state of Saturn, light is also thrown upon all other questions about the whence of these states. From the purely intellectual standpoint, it is naturally quite possible, in regard to any origin, to continue asking about the origin of this origin. But this is not permissible in the face of facts. We only need to make this clear by a comparison. If we find traces in a road, we may ask what has caused them. The answer may be a wagon. We can then ask further, whence came the wagon and whither has it gone? An answer founded upon facts is again possible. We might then ask further, who was sitting in it? What was the intention of the person who was using it? What was he doing? Finally, however, we shall come to a point where the questioning through the very facts comes to an end. Whoever continues to question deviates from the original intention of the question. He continues the questioning mechanically. We can easily see in cases like the one just cited for the sake of comparison, where the nature of facts brings an end to the questioning. In respect of the great questions of this cosmos, this is not so easily seen. By really exact observation, however, we shall notice that all questions concerning the whence must end at the above described Saturn states. For we have come to a sphere in which the beings and processes no longer justify themselves through their origin, but through themselves. The result of Saturn evolution is the development of the human germ to a certain stage. It has reached that low, dim consciousness spoken of above. It must not be imagined that the latter's development begins only in the last stage of Saturn. The spirits of will are active throughout all conditions of Saturn, but to supersensible perception the result in the last stage is most conspicuous. There exists no definite boundary line between the activities of the individual groups of beings. If it is said that in the beginning the spirits of will are active, then the spirits of wisdom, then another group of spiritual beings, it is not intended to mean that they were only active at that time. They are active throughout the whole of the Saturn evolution, but in the periods mentioned their activity can best be observed. The individual beings have then, as it were, the leadership." End quote. I will now relate another quote from one of the lectures of Rudolf Steiner, from The Inner Realities of Evolution, the Saturn Embodiment, GA 110, where he describes how time is born in the very beginning of Saturn. Quote, "Now imagine yourself surrounded by nothing but what I have described. I've already said, and have laid certain stress upon it, that we cannot say of it, we have it around us. We can only say, it is there. We must think ourselves into this. And concerning the conception that something is there flashing up, I said it was not a flash, but a glimmering. It is not as though something arose and vanished again. Everything is simultaneous. Now, however, the feeling comes that there is some connection between these spirits of will and the cherubim. The feeling comes to us that they have established a relationship to one another. We become conscious of this. And indeed we become conscious that the spirits of will or thrones sacrifice their own being to the cherubim. That is the last conception to which we can attain when we approach Saturn in retrospect, that of the sacrificing spirits of will offering their sacrifice to the cherubim. There the world is boarded up, and inasmuch as we can experience the sacrifice that the spirits of will make to the cherubim, something loses itself from our being. This we can express by saying, through the sacrifice made by the spirits of will to the cherubim, time is born. But time here is not the abstract time of which we usually speak, but independent being. We can now first speak of something that begins. Time begins with the birth of time beings, whose nature is pure time. Beings are born consisting only of time. These are the spirits of personality, known to us as archetypes in the hierarchy of spiritual beings. In the Saturn existence they are nothing but time. We have also described them as time spirits, as spirits who rule time, but there they are born as spirits. They are really beings consisting of nothing but time. To take part in this sacrifice of the spirits of will to the cherubim and in the birth of time is something of extraordinary importance. For it is only now, when time is born, that something else appears, something that makes it possible for us to speak of the Saturn condition as having anything in the least similar to our environment. What we call the element of warmth in Saturn is, as it were, the sacrificial smoke of the thrones giving birth to time. In occult science, in order not to shock people outside unduly, I have begun by describing the more external condition of ancient Saturn. They are quite shocked enough by this, and people who can only think in accordance with modern science look upon the book as pure nonsense. Just think what it would mean if we were to say, ancient Saturn has in its innermost being, in its very foundation, this fact that the beings belonging to the spirits of will offered sacrifice to the cherubim, that in the smoke of their sacrifice time came to birth as the sacrifice they brought to the cherubim, and that from this have proceeded the archetypes, the time spirits, and that external heat is nothing but a maya as compared with the sacrifice of the spirits of will. But so it is. Externally heat is really only a maya, and if we wish to speak truly we must say that wherever there is heat we have in reality sacrifice of the thrones to the cherubim. This is precisely what we have to attain. We must be able to transform the ideas we receive into imaginations, into pictures. Even if the pictures are clumsily formed, even if they are anthropomorphic, even if the beings appear as winged angels, etc., that does not signify. The rest will be given to us later, and what they ought not to have will fall away. When we yield ourselves to these pictures, we penetrate into imaginative perception." End quote. So now we can move forward to the description of this timeless world of the etheric powers, the world beyond the elemental world, the world beyond the beginning. Part 2. Description of my personal experiences in the world beyond. We must first of all understand the difference between the elemental material world and the pure etheric world. In Rudolf Steiner's book Theosophy, in chapter 3, the three worlds versus the physical world and its connection to the worlds of souls and spirits, we can read, quote, "The threefold world accordingly falls into the following categories. 1. Realm of archetypal formless beings, first elementary kingdom. 2. Realm of shape-creating beings, secondary elementary kingdom. 3. Realm of soul beings, third elementary kingdom. 4. Realm of created shapes, crystal forms, mineral kingdom. 5. Realm whose forms are sensibly perceptible and in which the shape-creating beings are active, plant kingdom. 6. Realm whose forms are sensibly perceptible and in which the shape-creating and soul beings are active, animal kingdom. 7. Realm whose forms are sensibly perceptible, and in which the shape-creating and soul beings are active, and in which the spirit fashions itself in the form of thought within the sense world, human kingdom. From this can be seen how the basic constituents of man living in the body are connected with the spiritual world. The physical body, the ether body, the sentient soul body, and the intellectual soul are to be regarded as archetypes of the spirit land condensed in the sensory world. The physical body comes into existence through condensation of the human archetype to the point of sensory appearance. For this reason, one can call this physical body also a being of the first elementary kingdom, condensed to sensory perceptibility. The ether body comes into existence through the fact that the shape thus engendered maintains its mobility through a being that extends its activity into the kingdom of the senses, but is not itself visible to the senses. If one wishes to characterize this being fully, it must be described as having its origin in the highest regions of spirit land, and thence shaping itself in the second region into an archetype of life. As such an archetype of life, it works in the sensory world. In a similar way, the being that builds up the sentient soul body has its origin in the highest regions of the spirit land, forms itself in the third spirit region into the archetype of the soul world, and as such works in the sensory world. The intellectual soul, however, comes into existence when in the fourth region of the spirit land the archetype of the thinking man gives itself a thought form in which it acts directly as thinking man in the world of the senses. Thus man stands within the world of the senses. Thus the spirit works on his physical body, ether body, and sentient soul body. Thus the spirit comes into manifestation in the intellectual soul. Archetypes in the form of beings who in a certain sense are external to man work upon the three lower members of his being. In his intellectual soul, he himself becomes a conscious worker upon himself. The beings who work on his physical body are the same as those who form mineral nature. Beings of the kind that live in the plant kingdom work on his ether body, and those beings such as live in the animal kingdom work on his sentient soul body. Both are imperceptible to the senses, but extend their activity into these kingdoms. Thus do the different worlds combine in action. The universe man lives in is the expression of this combined activity." End quote. In the book Anthroposophy, an introduction, on page 33, we can read, quote, "But if you confront the universal ether, it is as if you were swimming in the sea. There is only ether everywhere. It gives you no picture. But the moment I merely lift this piece of chalk, there appears an image in the etheric where my third man is unfolding his forces. Now the moment I radiate into this ether anything that proceeds from this third man, astral, within me, this ether responds as if it were like the third man within me, i.e. not etherically, but astral. Thus I release through my own activity something within the wide sea of ether that is similar to my own third man. What is this that acts in the ether as a counter-image? My hand moves from below upwards. The etheric picture moves from up downwards, an exact counter-image. It is an astral picture, a mere picture." End quote. Then he describes that in order to get an explanation, one needs to go back in time to a previous state of the earth. Quote, "Here is the present condition of the earth. I go back to an etheric earth. I do not find there, as yet, what has been released through me in the surrounding ether. I must go further back to a still earlier condition of the earth, in which the earth resembled my own astral body. The earth was then astral, a being like my third man. I must look for this being in times long past, in times long anterior to those in which the earth was etheric. Going backwards in time is really no different from seeing a distant object, a light, let us say, that shines as far as this. It is over there, but shines as far as here. It sends images to us here. Now put time instead of space. That which is of like nature with my own astral body was there in primeval times. Time has not ceased to be, it is still there. Just as in space light can shine as far as here, so that which lies in the long gone past works on into the present. Fundamentally speaking, the whole time evolution is still there. Whatever was once there, and is of like nature with what in the outer ether resembles my own astral body, has not disappeared. Here I touch on something that, spiritually, is actively present and makes time into space." End quote. In the book Anthroposophy, a fragment, Appendix 1, we can read, quote, "We can distinguish between the world that lies spread out before the human being, when one or more of the gates of the senses is open, and what is within the human being but connected to that world by means of the interrelationship between them. Here we will apply the term sense world to what is in the world spread out in this way. What we encounter within the human being, as just described, will be called the I human being. For the moment, let us not associate anything with this name other than its immediate usage here. The world out of which the capacity for sense perception is formed, in a similar way, for example, to how mental pictures are formed out of the sense world, will be called the etheric world, and what is born in the human being out of this etheric world, just as the I being is born out of the sense world, will be called the astral being. In using the term etheric world, we should not think of the ether of physics, nor should we think of anything other than what has just been characterized here in using the term astral being. In this way, an etheric world underlies the sense world, just as an astral being underlies the I being. Just as the etheric world cannot be sense perceptible because it is what generates the senses in the first place, so the astral being also cannot be experienced with the senses because it must precede the development of sensory capacities." End quote. The first stage consisted of fire, warmth ether, and physical warmth. The second of fire, warmth ether, physical warmth, light, air, and densification. The third of fire, warmth ether, physical warmth, light, air, densification, and the addition of time ether, water, and binding force. The fourth, our earth stage, consists of 4 elements, 4 ethers, and 4 physical forces. At each stage there is an extension of the manifest world. In the first stage, time appears, in the second, space, in the third, spatial movement, and in the fourth, form. Our earth condition embraces 4 ethers, 4 physical forces, and 4 elemental states. This gives us 4 earthly physical forces: diminishing warmth, condensing, densifying, darkness, mass-inducing binding forces, and fragmentation of striving to reduce to atoms. The first impression that met me when I crossed the threshold at the far side of the first realm of the elemental world was like going into a huge, bulging and soft balloon. The threshold was not strict like the threshold to the elemental world, but soft and streaming, all the time changing. It could be described as going into a huge world of streaming pastel clouds. The colours in the elemental worlds were bright and often sharp, but in this world they were soft and woolly, almost like sugar spin. At first I did not know what kind of world this was. However, I was quite sure that this new world was without time, without cause and effect, like it is in the 3 elemental worlds and also in our physical material world. At first I thought it might be some sort of a parallel world, an alternate cosmos, but this thought stayed with me only for a few days. Then I came to the realization that this world beyond the elemental world is the etheric world. This realization shocked me a little, as it turned all my perceptions from my whole life somewhat on their head. I had been wrong in so many ways. I had always thought that the elemental world was more or less the same as the etheric world, but I had been utterly wrong. The etheric body, often described as our body of living and formative forces, is composed out of the integrated streams or forces from the etheric world that are incorporated in the physical body as a foundation and life-giving part of the elemental worlds, and exist, in my opinion, as an individual part of the elemental realms or the elemental bodies. The elemental worlds, as well as the material world, are all made or created with the cooperation of the adversarial forces, in combination with the angelic worlds, and with the forces of the etheric world. But the pure etheric world is really beyond the material world, beyond the world of time, cause and effect. That is why, in the first part of this book, I tried to make you understand the creation before the Saturn state, before time entered the cosmos. This is the state where endurance governs, and where or when the pure etheric forces govern the world. And when we enter a world without time, space, cause and effect, the experience of such a world is quite different from what we, or I, normally have experienced as the spiritual world, which have been the elemental worlds. This part 2 of this book will be a detailed description of my increasing, I hope, encounter with and understanding of this etheric world, and also in what way it can be related to our own spirit, thinking, will and feeling. Many have written about how to experience the etheric world, for example through sacred geometry. In my opinion, this is the elemental world, not the etheric. In the crop circles, many believe that the etheric world is reaching out to help humankind. I do not think that. The crop circles are definitely born out of the elemental worlds, and it is very important to remember that the main and leading forces in the elemental worlds are the adversarial forces, the luciferic forces, the aramanic forces, the azuric forces. This I've described in length in my last book, The Three Realms of the Elemental World. As we now understand, many descriptions of the etheric world have to be reconsidered and re-evaluated. I will try to quote many of these descriptions and then give my evaluation of them. The 12 layers of the etheric world. We already know that there are 4 qualities of the forces of the etheric world, almost like there are 4 main forces of the physical material world, as well as the material body. But as the cosmos, the earth and the body have 12 layers, the etheric world has also 12 layers. These layers are best distinguished by the colour they have. Here I will describe the 12 layers of the body in brief, and relate them to the 12 layers of the earth and to the 12 layers of the etheric world. So the first layer, the layer of the body according to Thoresen, the astral sheath of the body, the layer of the earth according to Steiner, the physical earth, the layers of the etheric world, pastel pink. Second layer, the layer of the body according to Thoresen, the astral and the physical material body. The layers of the earth according to Steiner, fluid earth, high pressure, expansion. The layers of the etheric world, pastel red. Third layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen, the physical material body. If the physical is turned into spirit, it shows the opposite. If a spiritual entity points to one direction, it means the other way. The layers of the earth according to Steiner, damp or air earth. Here the substances are in a damp state. This layer is full of life. This layer wants to expand even more than the second layer. It is in close connection to passions in the human and the animal world. The layers of the etheric world, pastel orange. Fourth layer, the layers of the body according to Ari Thoresen. The parasitic bodies within our physical material body and alien physical bodies, bacteria that we use to digest foodstuffs. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. Water earth or form earth. Here all substances are in an astral form. The astral form is the negative of the material form, just as in Devacham. The layers of the etheric world, pastel green. Fifth layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. 1. The etheric body, warmth ether, infrared. Also the scars of the body, both physical and mental, that have come from life's experiences of living in the warmth. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. Fruit earth, where everything is pure life, everything is living here. This is the blueprint of all life, but in an inversed form. The layers of the etheric world, pastel green blue. Sixth layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. 2. The etheric body, light ether, blue equals Araman, red equals Lucifer. Also the scars of the body, both physical and mental, that have come from life's experiences living in the light. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. Fire earth, which is in direct contact to human emotions, especially fiery emotions. Human suffering will upset this layer and lead to volcanic activity. The layers of the etheric world, pastel blue. Seventh layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen, free, the etheric body. Chemical ether, ultraviolet, also the scars of the body, both physical and mental, that have come from life's experiences, living in sound ether. The layers of the earth according to Rudolf Steiner. Mirroring earth or reflecting earth. Here all the natural forces and laws found, all the laws used within physics, but in their opposite, all moral impulses are here changed into their opposite. The layers of the etheric world, pastel bright blue. Eighth layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. 4. The etheric body, life ether green, also the scars of the body, both physical and mental, that have come from life's experiences living in the life forces. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. Splintering earth, layer of the numbers according to Pythagoras. All living entities are here splintered into multiple copies of the original. Source of black magic. The layers of the etheric world, pastel red. Ninth layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. The demonic eye, the lower passions that we are not aware of. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. The core of the earth, here is the origin of black magic. The layers of the etheric world, pastel yellow-white. 10th layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. The I, the ego, egoism, the normal self. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. The 10th, 11th, 12th layer of the earth are not described by Steiner. The layers of the etheric world, pastel dim white. 11th layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. The higher I, idealism, what we call the superego. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. The 10th, 11th, 12th layer of the earth are not described by Steiner. The layers of the etheric world, pastel, normal, white. 12th layer, the layers of the body according to Thoresen. The Christ eye, the divine consciousness, Christ consciousness. The layers of the earth according to Steiner. The 10th, 11th, 12th layer of the earth are not described by Steiner. The layers of the etheric world, pastel concentrated white. I will try to describe my own experiences and findings in the etheric world in detail. I will describe how I experienced this world beyond the elemental world and how I can use these powers in different aspects of life and spirituality, like in working with the three occultisms, in working with veterinary medicine, in working with acupuncture, in working with biodynamic agriculture, in working with Goetheanistic observations. Christology, how to find the Christ, in working with nature and in working with meditation. I will start by discussing the work with the three occultisms. The three occultisms. I have through all three books made several considerations about the three occultisms, the mechanical occultism, the hygienic occultism, and the eugenic occultism. All discussed, more or less in depth, in my last book, The Three Realms. Hygienic occultism. If I am to describe the use of hygienic occultism, which I myself have practiced for many years, I will describe this as using the power of etheric energy derived from the etheric world in the third realm of the elemental world, thus working into the material world. That is what it feels like to heal with this power. Mechanical occultism. Likewise, to make a machine work out of the descriptions given by Rudolf Steiner in his lectures entitled In the Changed Conditions of the Times, GA 186, where he describes, quote, powers which in the future human beings will develop in a quite elemental way, end quote. We have to do here with powers that are unknown to materialistic science and as such rules out the moral use of electricity, as we know this power very well. I consider this power the same as the power derived from the etheric world and used in machines of the second realm of the elemental world, which means used on an atomic level. Rudolf Steiner continued more specifically, quote, "Every knowledgeable member of these secret circles is aware that solely by means of certain capacities which are still latent in man but are still evolving, and with the help of the law of harmonious vibrations, machines and mechanical constructions can be set in motion." You will find a small indication of this in what I connected with the figure of Strada in my mystery plays. The capacity to set motors in motion according to the law or interacting vibrations we develop on a considerable scale among the English-speaking peoples. End quote. We will also consider what Rudolf Steiner said in a lecture given in Dornach on November the 25th, 1917, GA 178. Quote, "I have often deliberately pointed out, even in public lectures, that human consciousness depends on destructive forces. During public lectures in Basel, I twice said that in our nerve system we are always in process of dying. These forces of death will become stronger and stronger, and we shall find that they are related to the forces of electricity and magnetism, and to those that work in machines. A man will be able, in a certain sense, to guide his attentions and his thoughts into the forces of machines. Forces in human nature that are still unknown will be discovered, forces that will act upon external electricity and magnetism." End quote. Eugenic occultism. This kind of occultism is, in my opinion, the ability to govern or regulate the forces of the first realm of the elemental world. As the leading force in the third realm, where healing powers may be found, working through magnetism, is the adversarial force of Lucifer. As the leading force in the second realm, working through electricity, where mechanical supremacy may be found, is the adversarial force of Ahriman. So the leading force in the first realm, where eugenic powers may be found, working through what Steiner called the third force, in my interpretation vacuum, are the Asuras. With eugenic occultism, the ability to direct the incarnating souls to specific parents or birthplaces, I have no experience of, and I do not know anybody who does. Veterinary medicine. With veterinary medicine, I have worked for almost 40 years. What I soon observed was that all diseases in animals belonging to a human were derived from that very human. The diseases literally jumped over from the human to the animal. The disease entity belonging to the third realm of the elemental world was more or less free to change host. This more or less was related to two things: the treatment of the diseased individual and the susceptibility or openness of the receiver of the pathological entity, which I usually call a demon. When an animal accepts its owner as its lord, the transfer is almost already done. To hinder such translocation, I must use forces from the etheric world, from the Christ force in the etheric world. Treating only within the elemental realms will only cause translocation. Only the Christ force can make a transformation of the disease as described in my books on translocation. In use in school medicine, such a translocation takes 3 weeks, the same time as after a human being has bought a dog or a cat. My diagnosis observations were described in 8 points. 1. In treating animals, I found that the deeper cause of the disease in the animals almost always was the same as the deeper cause in the owner. 2. In treating humans, I found that the deeper cause of the symptoms usually was the same in the children as in the dominating parent. 3. In treating humans, I found that the deeper cause of the symptoms often was the same as in the spouse, especially if the spouse was the dominating partner. 4. I found that in treating the alpha human, the origin of the deeper cause of the disease in a transformative way, a healing process was induced in the whole family and farm animals. 5. When I regularly monitored the health of animals, especially horses, and they were sold to another person, the deepest cause of their symptoms changed from being like the old alpha owner to be like the new alpha owner as soon as the animal accepted the new owner as his alpha master. Also, when a young woman who was living with her dominant mother and thus showed the same deficiency as the mother married a dominant man, she changed the deeper cause, in several of my books also called the deficient organ, in 3 years. 6. The described deeper cause of the disease showed different symptoms in relation to where in the body this deeper cause found its expression. A kidney weakness in the human remained a kidney weakness in the animal, but it expressed itself very differently depending on where in the body it, the kidney weakness, found a home, found a hold. 7. I found that if there were no homes or places of hold in the beta human or child or animal, the transferred disease cause or weakness was not allowed to come to expression, but remained dormant, subclinical. Acupuncture. I started with acupuncture already in 1980. I soon observed that the energy described in acupuncture literature actually was pathological entities which can be named demons. I found that the use of 5 elemental thinking furthers translocation of the deeper cause, while using systems based on 7 or 12 element thinking furthers a transformation. A 6 element thinking furthers a suppression of the symptoms. 5 elemental thinking as a representative for the Eastern way of thinking, Chinese thinking, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism. 6 elemental thinking as a representative for the Middle East way of thinking, Islamic, Jewish. 7 or 12 element thinking as a representative for the European way of thinking, Christian, anthroposophic. In this described way I worked my way from the elemental world of 5 elements to the 12-foldness of the etheric cosmos, and as such experiencing the Christ in the deepest layer of this 12-foldness, and thus hinder a translocation of the disease. Biodynamic agriculture. As an anthroposophist, I have always found a great interest in the making of the biodynamic preparations. I observed that the work of the preparations created elemental beings of the 3rd realm of the elemental world, but with enlarged sense organs. Some had huge ears, some huge eyes, and some a very sensitive skin. I found this very interesting, but still only in and relating to the elemental world. I missed the pure etheric relation, and especially the Christ relation of the 4 inner realms of the etheric world. Then I found a very special book written by Paul Emberson. Its title was The Death of Nutrition and the Resurrection of Humanity. In this book, Paul Emberson tells us that Rudolf Steiner, in parallel to his well-known agricultural course held in Korbowitz, now Korbowitz, Poland, 7th to the 16th of June in 1924, GA 327, held another course. In the agricultural course, Steiner lays out the foundation for how to restore the etheric nutritional value of nourishment, without which, he says, man will be crippled in his spiritual strivings and make it impossible for him to develop true clairvoyance and thus the possibility to meet the Christ in the etheric world. Only with a true biodynamic agriculture will this be possible, and with well-produced preparations. But unknown to most farmers today, he also held a parallel course for a few chosen farmers in whom he could sense a relation to Christ. To this smaller circle of just a few, he told that if the elemental beings created by the ordinary biodynamic methods could not suffice to open the etheric world for a Christ experience, the farmers must also have a Christ meditative consciousness to be able to do this. In my interpretation, a farmer must be able to penetrate from the elemental world to the etheric world with his consciousness to be able to produce food capable of saving humankind for Christ. Goetheanistic observations. This way of observing is fundamental in all spirituality. After the 3 realms opened for me, the whole world changed in many ways, especially in my phenomenological observations of nature. After the threshold of the etheric world opened, these observations again changed. Especially the so-called laws of the world are quite different in the material world. in the elementary world and in the etheric world. To observe phenomena in these three worlds and to make some understanding from them, we must also consider the different laws properly. In the material world, we have all the different laws that we know from living there. In the third realm of the elemental world, we experience everything in an opposite way from that of the material world. In the second realm, I experience all phenomena as sharp and flowing, rather moving, colours and sounds. In the first realm of the elemental world, I experience all phenomena as functions of vacuum and the laws described more or less in quantum mechanics. In the etheric world, I experience the important laws as nourishing, birthing, growing and moving pastel colours. Christology. One of my main goals during most of my life, even when I defined myself as an atheist, was to find the Christ, the being of Christ, the Christ force or Christ the consciousness. For many years I tried to and almost expected to find the Christ in what I then thought was the etheric world, but it was only in the third realm of the elemental world. Then, when I ventured deeper into the elemental world, I thought that maybe the Christ was here, but alas, he was not. Then, when I broke the threshold of the etheric world, I started to get closer to the Christ. In the beginning, I only observed these huge and overwhelming cloud masses of the etheric world with their pastel colours and streaming and flowing forms. Then I started to see that there were different layers in these clouds, and that these layers were arranged concentric around a centre. The four inner layers were in different shades of white, different intensities of white. In the body, the four inner layers are all related to both the eye functions of the human entity and also to the four chambers of the heart. I am today convinced that the Christ may be experienced in these four inner white layers relating to the I Am. Nature work. My first writing and also my first book was called Popple in its original Norwegian language. This book described the nature beings of trees, especially in the third realm of the elemental world. But in the end, the observations transcend this elemental world and ends up in contemplating and experiencing the deepest layers of the etheric world in an all-encompassing Christ experience in the high plains of the Norwegian mountains. Meditation. In meditation, one of the greatest changes during this time of exploration of the three realms and the world beyond has occurred. Before this voyage of exploring, I meditated in more a normal way, concentrating on mantras, on sentences, or on certain passages from the works of holy men. After the opening of the elemental realms, I tend more and more to travel and observe in these realms during my meditations, and let these realms and worlds become more and more known to me, also during both sleep and the waking state, as often as I can. The meditation always starts by creating a certain gap between the etheric and the astral bodies. This makes me pass the threshold to the third realm of the elemental world, where all the elemental entities are to be found. The nature beings are the karmic elementals of man. Or, when I explore as a therapist, all the elemental beings that are the cause of diseases and pain in both the human and the animals, the so-called demonic elementals. This is where I stopped my travelling before the 30th of March 2020. After this date I enjoy travelling further over the next threshold, which, by the way, is quite small, to the second realm of the elemental world. In the second realm I can observe the deeper forces of the elements, the atomic forces bathed in strong colours and mathematical patterns and constructions. In the first realm I observe the cosmic voids and the deeper forces of the vacuum of the cosmos. When I then pass the threshold to the etheric world beyond, all changes fundamentally. The colours become fluent and pastel-like, like a huge rainbow. Where there are no traces of adversarial forces or entities, at least as far as I've observed until now. This etheric world is beyond the elemental world. From this etheric world beyond, it is possible to be aware of yet two other worlds above, the first which I feel is the astral world, and then the next which I feel is the spiritual world, the devachanic worlds. I cannot stop myself from comparing this travelling meditation with the structure of the 19 classes of the Michael School given by Rudolf Steiner in 1924. Lessons 1 to 7 resembles the preparation of passing the threshold to the spiritual world, actually the elemental world. Lesson 7 describes the passing of the threshold. The first tablet instructs the traveller to understand that this world that now lies before him or her is created by the mind itself in connection with the materializing adversarial forces. Lesson 8 to 11 describes the elemental world of the third realm of the elemental world. Lesson 11 to 13 describes the second realm of the elemental world. The second and the third tablet describe the insights and mood necessary for entering the first realm of the elemental world. Lesson 14 to 16 describes the fundamental forces of the adversaries in creating this illusion that the material world and the elemental worlds are. Lectures 17 to 19 describe the etheric world beyond the elemental world. This is the first class of the spiritual school initiated by Rudolf Steiner with the inspiration from the Archangel Michael. This school was intended to be led by Etheric. The second class was intended to be inspired by the cosmic wisdom of Sophia, describing the path through the astral world, found above the etheric world. This school was intended to be led by Marie Steiner. The third class of the spiritual school was intended to be inspired by the Christ himself, describing the path through the spiritual world, the world above the astral world. This school was intended to be led by Rudolf Steiner himself. This work was stopped by the death of Rudolf Steiner in 1925. This book, Beyond the Elemental World, must be seen as a continuation of my last two books, The Northern Way of Initiation and The Three Realms, almost like a volume 3. For many, many years, I have read about, talked about, and even been able to a certain extent to see clairvoyantly into the so-called etheric world with its multitude of entities. I've also been aware of that a certain part of this etheric world, the part that expressed itself or was or is the foundation of the material existence, is called the elementary world. Much changed on the 30th of March 2020 when my eyes suddenly opened to deeper realms of the elemental world, called the second realm and the first realm of the elemental world. Then, a few days later, also opening the etheric and astral worlds as well as the angelic worlds, as all these are more or less interconnected. Then, on the 3rd of August 2020, my eyes opened to a further depth, to another world beyond the elemental realms, which I at first called a parallel world, but now understand as the etheric world. This totally subsided the limits of both the Northern Way of Initiation and the Three Realms, and I again understood that I had to write a new book, a third book. That third book is Beyond the Three Elemental Worlds, the Etheric World, by Thoresen, which you have just been listening to, read by DJ Elliott.